was taken against her will.
But is her disappearance only the beginning?
There is another woman who is abducted at shotgun point.
You start thinking, could I be that next person?
Sergeant Joe Kenda must stop a savage predator before he strikes again.
He's hunting for a target because he is a wolf. How many victims did he have? We need to find him. The most distraught thing to any human is a mystery that goes unresolved. What exactly happened? Without knowing that, it eats away at people.
It's a frigid winter night in Colorado Springs. But the bone-chilling temperatures don't stop 23-year-old Lisa Schaefer from craving something cold.
Ice cream? Tonight, of all nights?
It's out of my hands. I can't control what this little one wants.
Okay, what flavor?
I don't know, surprise me.
Okay, I'm off work in about 20 minutes. I'll stop by the store on my way home.
Thanks, Mom. I love you.
Love you too. Bye.
Lisa was waiting for her mother to come home. But she happened to doze off and went into a pretty deep sleep there for a while.
Sometime during the night, she wakes up and thinks, I'm hungry. I want some ice cream. Mom told me she was going to pick this up for me.
Mom, where's the ice cream?
She decided to go check on her mother.
Mom?
It's 1 o'clock in the morning. She should have been home an hour and a half ago.
But her mother wasn't there.
As the first rays of dawn shine their light on CSPD headquarters, Sergeant Joe Kenda already has his nose to the grindstone.
I finally had some peace and quiet in my office. I relished those moments when I had time to move through paperwork without being interrupted every 10 seconds.
But Kenda's well-earned moment of solitude is soon interrupted.
I was reviewing reports, and as I was signing one, I heard a woman crying. I am a policeman, but I'm also a human being. And there's a natural instinct that you want to help someone who's in tears. This could be serious.
Just give me 1 minute. So who is she? Her name is Lisa Schaefer. She said her mother, Elaine, never made it home from work last night, so she wanted to come in and report her missing.
And how far along is she?
She says she's due in 1 month.
Let's go get her.
She was hysterical. She was upset. She was concerned.
So you have to take a very diplomatic approach so as not to put a great amount of stress on a young girl in an advanced stage of pregnancy.
Miss, I'm Sergeant Kenda. Why don't you join us in my office and we can see if we can figure this all out.
Okay.
Please have a seat.
Thank you. So I've been living with my mom for a couple months. The pregnancy has been really difficult, so she insisted that I stay with her so she could take care of me.
Lisa tells police that her mother, Elaine Schaefer, is a hardworking 44-year-old single mom, recently divorced, mother of 5.
You had a problem, she would be there and she would help out and she would help anybody out.
When's the last time you spoke to her?
Around 9:15, she called to say she was about done with work.
And where's work?
The Broadmoor Hotel. She works in the golf pro shop. She was going to eat dinner at the restaurant and then go to the grocery store.
My sister called me up saying Mom's not home. She went and picked me up some things and she's never made it back. If my mom said she was going to be there, she would be there.
Is there a chance she just changed her mind? Maybe went out for drinks with her coworkers?
You don't understand. My mom is so worried about me and the baby. Today alone, she called 5 times from work just to check in on me. She's been in a car wreck or something, I'm telling you.
We can check on that. What kind of car does she drive?
A black Mustang.
What was she wearing?
She described her as wearing knee-high boots, a sweater skirt, and a fur jacket that is pretty distinguishable.
We'll make sure to check all the emergency rooms.
Thank you, please. Please find my mom.
We'll find her. That's what we do.
In the meantime, I want you to try not to worry too much. Your mom hasn't been gone that long. There's a good chance she's just fine, and it's just a big misunderstanding.
That seemed to calm this girl somewhat. And I said, we'll stay in constant contact with you and advise you of our findings.
Miss Schaefer, just follow me this way.
But despite his assurances, Kenda has a suspicion something terrible has happened to Lisa's mother.
As a policeman, your instincts kick in. And my first thought was the fact that she called her 5 times that day and then never came home? Something isn't right about that. I had patrol units check the parking lot at the Broadmoor for her car, and had patrol units check parking lots throughout the city.
You want to alert your traffic officers. Has there been an accident involving this vehicle? You want to also alert officers to start checking parking lots of grocery stores in the area.
The initial search comes up empty.
I got nothing here, Sergeant.
10-4. Thanks. Let me know what else you turn up.
In terms of a missing person under the circumstances that Lisa Schaefer described, no news is not good news in this case.
As the rest of the city begins its day, Kenda dispatches a pair of investigators to Elaine's workplace to gather any information they can.
The Broadmoor Hotel is a very prestigious hotel here in Colorado Springs. It has hosted presidents, celebrities, a place that people in Colorado Springs are very proud of.
She worked in the golf shop.
You're all set for your tea time tomorrow, and here is your receipt.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
We're with the Colorado Springs Police Department, and were you working last night?
Yes, I was here. My name's Sharon Johnson. What can we help you with?
Lane Schaefer did not make it home last night from her shift.
Oh my God. I was wondering why she hadn't come in yet.
She said that Elaine has worked there for years. She never calls off sick, and she never just doesn't come in without calling. So she's very alarmed.
When was the last time you saw her?
Last night, around close, it was about 9:30.
Sharon says she saw Elaine in the hotel restaurant before heading home.
You all wrapped up?
Yeah. I'm gonna finish up here and go home to my daughter. She's expecting, you know.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I feel too young to be a grandma.
She was going to stop at the grocery store and pick up some ice cream for her daughter.
As far as I know, after dinner, she went to the supermarket and then went straight home.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Joe, looks like this is a dead end.
Okay, thank you.
Let me know if anything changes.
Copy that.
Kenda out.
The more I hear, the more I don't like it. My instincts tell me this is not a disappearance. This is a crime. And I don't think this is going to end well at all.
For 2 days, police failed to uncover any additional information regarding Elaine Schaefer's whereabouts. But then, a man driving on the outskirts of town makes a startling discovery.
Joseph McCormick is driving his pickup truck out in the middle of the plains. He believes he sees a dead animal. This is not an animal. It is a human being. We are investigating a missing persons case, and now El Paso County calls to report that they are investigating a death in close proximity to the city limits of Colorado Springs.
It's Kenda.
Sergeant Kenda, this is Detective Sergeant Gary Brown from El Paso County Sheriff's Office.
What you got?
I saw your missing person report on the wires. Looks like we found a body.
There's always a possibility this could be someone else entirely, but the concern is this is her.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sergeant. I'll meet you there. Bye.
A short time later, Kenda and Sergeant Robert Sapp arrive at the scene.
Sergeant Brown.
Yes.
Sergeant Sapp. CSPD. This is Sergeant Kenda.
Good to meet you. The cold weather's preserved the body. Not much decomposition.
So we don't know how long she's been out here?
Nope. Looks like it all began right over here.
There are drag marks with some blood 15 feet from the side of the road. This person was wounded before dragged to a final resting place and is then shot to death.
Only a shotgun can cause that type of damage. How many gunshot wounds are there?
Won't know for sure until the coroner cleans up the body. But including the headshot, I'd say at least 4 or 5.
The presence of overkill can indicate that the killer was known to his victim.
I asked the coroner to perform a rape kit. The injury to her head is too massive for a facial identification. But if we're lucky, they can ID her through prints.
Fur coat, boots. I think we know who this is.
Elaine Schaefer is no longer missing. Elaine Schaefer has been found. The sadness is that she's not been found alive.
It was important that we do everything we can before something else happens.
Thanks.
That evening, El Paso County Sheriff Sergeant Gary Brown notifies Elaine's family of the tragic news.
The El Paso County Sheriff's Office took the lead in this investigation due to the fact that the body was located within the jurisdiction of the Sheriff's Office.
Hi, is Lisa Schaefer here?
Yeah, I'm her brother Andrew.
May I come in? I'm very sorry to tell you both, but we found a body. And by all indications, we're pretty confident it's your mother.
I mean, are you sure?
We'll confirm with dental records, but yes. The clothing description clearly matches what you told us she was wearing last.
Oh my God.
When our family found out, it was shock, sadness, anger. And we really didn't know how to take it. It was just a cold numbness, a numb feeling.
We're devoting all our resources to finding who did this. But I need to ask, is there anyone you can think of that may have wanted to do her harm?
There was this one strange thing that happened. She got this creepy letter from a coworker. Here.
Lisa explains that her mother, Elaine, brought the letter home and was distressed by it.
So what does it say?
I've been thinking about you. You're so special. I don't think you know how special you are.
It is a letter expressing love and admiration for Elaine, very graphic, in some ways perhaps a little pornographic.
I long to make you scream in ecstasy for hours.
Mom, who is this guy?
And the letter is signed, your sex slave, Reggie.
Your sex slave? I mean, right away, that would sort of raise your hackles a little bit.
Who's this Reggie?
It's just some guy from the Broadmoor. Apparently, he wrote my mom a bunch of those. It made her really uncomfortable.
The likelihood is great that somebody sexually assaults this woman and then kills her. Could this be the personality that could be filled with rage if they were rejected or somehow insulted? Reggie rises to the very top as a person of interest in the case.
Sergeant Brown contacts the Broadmoor Hotel and learns that Reggie is Reginald Senton and is employed as a custodian.
You Reginald Senton?
Yeah, that's me.
Do you know Elaine Schaefer?
Yeah, she's a friend. Works here in the pro shop. What's this all about?
Well, Elaine's been missing a couple days, and I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
Missing? Wow, I don't know.
Reggie does immediately express concern, but Sergeant Brown does not tell him Elaine Schaefer has been found.
Why would you think I have anything to do with this?
Because I get the sense that you wanted more from Elaine than just friendship. Did you write this?
Yes, sir.
Reggie freely admits it. Yes, he did. He thought that Elaine Schaefer was the prettiest woman he'd ever seen, and he felt that it was important for her to know how he felt about her.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi, Reggie.
I am off work pretty soon. And I was wondering if you maybe want to grab a cup of coffee after work?
Oh, sure. Why not?
So we went out on a few dates.
And did it get physical?
Yeah, a little. I mean, I really liked her.
Elaine Schaefer was recently divorced, and the two of them had sort of developed a friendship, but it became the kind of thing where maybe Reggie was thinking a little bit more about Elaine than she was about him.
I wrote some letters, hoping to spark some interest.
Reggie selected a method as best described as somewhat unusual, but that was his method that he thought would work.
Your sex slave, Reggie.
Is it possible that Elaine's negative reaction drove Reggie over the edge?
Well, Reggie, here's the thing. We found Elaine's body.
What?
She was shot multiple times.
Reggie has a very believable emotional reaction to the news of her demise.
So can you tell me where you were Tuesday night?
Drinking with a friend. Stayed at his house. He can vouch for that, I swear.
And he's able to describe that quite clearly, provides the address, provides the phone number.
Do me a favor. Don't leave town.
Yes, sir.
They check on his alibi, and it's solid. So now we have murder with no suspect.
But just when it appears the investigation is at a standstill, a call comes in over the radio.
County Dispatch.
Elaine Schaefer's vehicle is found in the parking lot of a grocery store, most likely the site of her abduction. This is very promising news. We've now discovered Elaine Schaefer's car abandoned in a grocery store parking lot in the city limits.
El Paso County Sergeant Gary Brown is the first to respond.
What do we got?
Well, I was driving by and saw this car sitting in pretty much empty parking lot here, and I ran the tags and it came back to Elaine Schaefer.
Let's see. Brother.
Yeah, go ahead.
Groceries.
The discovery makes investigators wonder if Elaine had been ambushed by a predator while picking up a late-night snack for her daughter Lisa.
She had put those items in her car and probably closed that door, and most likely at that point was confronted by someone who is armed.
The groceries also provide another critical piece of information.
The transaction showed that it was January the 19th, 1988, at around 11 p.m.
Bingo. Now we know roughly when she was abducted.
And that's not all.
There is a cashier number on the receipt, which means that Sergeant Brown has someone to speak to in regard to Elaine Schaefer buying these groceries. This could be almost the last person to see her alive.
Nice work.
Thank you.
The manager informs them that that number is the number of a Rick Welker. He was working that night.
Rick, this officer wants to talk to you.
What's going on?
Mr. Welker, do you recall this woman who came in about 3 nights ago? She was wearing a white rabbit's fur jacket.
Yes, I do actually. She bought about 4 different kinds of ice cream. Midnight Munchies?
It's for my daughter. She's pregnant and craving ice cream. But I couldn't remember what flavor she wanted, so I hope it's one of these.
Your total comes to $15.87.
What about her demeanor? Seem nervous or scared at all? Was anyone in the store giving her trouble?
She seemed fine, and she was the last customer, so no.
Thanks very much.
It's entirely possible that her killer was waiting for her to return from the store, knowing she was alone. And forced her to come with him.
The following morning, Sergeant Brown meets with the coroner. He and Kenda know when Elaine was abducted. Now they hope to determine whether she died shortly thereafter, or if she was held captive for a few days before being killed.
What have we got?
Let me show you. It's pretty rough. Multiple wounds.
She has 7 gunshot wounds from a shotgun. That's an incredible number of wounds from such a weapon.
What about time of death?
Well, we found undigested food in her stomach. I'm pretty confident in telling you that this occurred within 3 to 4 hours of her last meal.
She has her work meal approximately at 9:30. At 11:06, she is alive and is buying groceries. She's then discovered dead with the undigested contents of her last meal still in her stomach, meaning she dies almost immediately after being grabbed in that parking lot.
What about the rape kit? Anything come back on that yet?
Yeah, we found pubic hair that doesn't belong to her. Still doing tests. Don't have the final results yet.
Whoever's responsible for this crime is ruthless beyond belief. He is willing to do whatever's necessary to satisfy his desires, to include kill and overkill. A very dangerous individual.
But the identity of this dangerous individual remains a mystery. as investigators wait for the coroner's final results from the rape kit.
Sergeant Brown.
Sergeant Brown receives a potentially game-changing phone call.
Detective Sergeant Brown is contacted by a Cheryl Blackman, who reports that she is a friend of Elaine Schaefer, and she has information about this case.
Thank you for coming in, Miss Blackman.
What can you tell me?
I want you to know that I'm doing this for Elaine.
Okay.
Miss Blackman indicated that Elaine Schaefer and her husband, Aaron, had a very successful real estate business.
The business apparently collapsed at some point, and there were great financial pressures brought to bear in the marriage, which is difficult for any marriage.
We have 5 kids, Aaron. How are we supposed to get by?
I can't control the housing market, Elaine.
I'm not asking you to control the market.
How about a little support from you? All you do is nag.
Elaine had confided in her that Aaron had gotten pretty angry with her at times and actually got pretty physical with her at times.
My dad were separated, and it wasn't the best separation.
She told me after the divorce that he really wouldn't let go.
One of the things that you end up doing is you end up knowing a lot about those families to help you either eliminate them or to include them.
But what Cheryl Blackman tells Sergeant Brown next puts Aaron Schaefer at the top of the suspect list.
Elaine said that she was getting more and more afraid. Just 2 weeks ago, she told me something.
She says Elaine Schaefer told her, "If anything ever happens to me, please tell all of this to the police." We've discovered that Elaine Schaefer lived in fear of her ex-husband, and he might be involved in this crime.
Elaine, open the door.
Elaine and Aaron had separated.
Elaine!
But Aaron continued to harass.
Open the door. Open the door, I'm gonna bust it in.
Get out of here, Aaron.
And Elaine actually had to get a restraining order.
It's my house, damn it.
According to police records, one incident at the Schaefer residence even led to Aaron being arrested.
This ain't over, Elaine. I'll be back.
All right, shut your mouth.
With Aaron Schaefer now a suspect, investigators bring him in for questioning.
Aaron realizes that he's in potentially a great deal of trouble because he has had problems with Elaine in the past.
So, Aaron, it's no mystery why you're here and why we need to talk to you, right?
Look, I'm not proud of myself. I did some things I shouldn't have. But I didn't murder her. Besides, I wasn't even in Colorado at the time. When my marriage fell apart, I went to California to start over.
So why are you here now?
Because my daughter, Lisa, wanted me here.
He says Lisa called him in California and informed him of the death. He then immediately flew here.
Can you prove that?
Call Lisa and ask her.
Sergeant Brown contacted Lisa, who confirmed in fact she reached him by phone in San Diego, where he was living. Mr. Schaefer is therefore out as involved in this crime.
It's an emotional letdown for everybody, but it also recharges the batteries because now we're even more determined.
As days pass, the murder remains unsolved. But Kenda's thoughts never stray from trying to find Elaine Schaefer's killer.
In my mind, this is more and more likely a stranger attack. Someone is taking the chance of being observed, forcing a female at gunpoint into a vehicle in a public place, resulting in sexual assault and murder. This is not a first-time crime. This is a repeat offender.
Operating on this chilling theory, Kenda sends out a department-wide call to any member of the CSPD who might have worked a similar case. Within hours, an officer comes forward.
Excuse me, sir. I have something I think you might be interested in. I took down a report of attempted kidnapping pretty recently.
Officer Hill approaches me to report that he remembers a woman named Carol Jones, who was abducted at shotgun point from the parking lot of a grocery store.
Keep looking forward.
Okay.
He told her to drive to the interstate, and if she didn't do what he said to her, he would kill her. He is acting as if he is a user. Cocaine can induce rage and paranoia in people and change behavior dramatically.
Please. Please don't kill me, please.
Shut up and drive.
Officer Hill explains, at that point, Carol Jones makes a courageous decision.
She pulled up to a intersection, and she thought, if I don't get out of this car, I'm going to be killed. She bolted across the street and ran to the nearest business she could find to call 911.
I just thought it mirrored the case you're working on pretty closely.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Officer Hill.
Thank you, sir.
It's obvious to me that this is our dude. It's him. It's him. Now, who is him?
After speaking with Kenda, Sergeant Brown takes a closer look at the Carol Jones case and finds a connection to another abduction attempt about 2 weeks earlier in a suburb of Denver.
Greenwood Village Police.
Hello, Detective Harris. Detective Sergeant Gary Brown from the El Paso County Sheriff's Office.
What can I do you for, Sergeant Brown?
I'm working a case that could be related to your kidnapping. Can you tell me what happened?
Yeah, a local here in Greenwood Village named Kathy Winston
was doing some grocery shopping when she was attacked in a parking lot.
Get that truck.
No, get away from me!
So now we have the use of a shotgun, kidnapping females as targets of opportunity.
According to Greenwood Village Police, Kathy Winston was able to provide police with a crucial piece of information that led them directly to her would-be abductor.
She was able to give that license number to the Greenwood Village Police Department.
We're getting more excited. The speed picks up because now we're getting close to where we believe we've got something.
Now, where is this going to lead us? Well, that's what we're about to find out. We are investigating the disappearance and ultimate murder of Elaine Schaefer. We have discovered Greenwood Village Police have apprehended an individual for kidnapping.
Definitely sounds like it could be our guy.
Well, good. We've got him under arrest.
His name is Richard Cronin. He is a white male. He has an extensive criminal record and recently has been in prison.
When did all this go down?
We picked him up yesterday.
It's a big mistake.
My husband didn't do anything.
I'm gonna start searching.
Greenwood police explain that they didn't find any guns during the arrest, but they did find a small amount of cocaine.
Do you want to handle the follow-up interview with his
wife, Wendy?
Absolutely. Heading that way now.
Wendy Cronin contacted investigators, saying she has information for them.
Miss Cronin, I know this is difficult. Has Richard been acting different lately? Has he been secretive? Anything unusual?
Well, the past few months have been really difficult, especially after he lost his mechanic job at the dealership.
But he'd gotten fired from that job recently. Richard's behavior began to change dramatically. He started using cocaine. He started to become more violent. And there were a couple of occasions in the recent past when he came home very late at night.
Where the hell have you been?
Just out with a guy shooting pool.
I'm doing coke again, right?
Mind your own business!
I didn't want to believe it when they arrested him, that he could do that to a woman. But after the police left, I found something.
What did you find?
I can show you.
And they find a 12-gauge riot shotgun with a 7-round capacity. The exact number of shots fired into Elaine Schaefer.
I've never seen it before.
Looks like police issue.
Now that was startling information.
And that's just the beginning.
Hey, you know that shotgun they found in Richard Cronin's truck?
Yeah.
They traced the registration. It's one of ours.
What? How the hell did that happen?
One of our patrol officers reported his shotgun missing 2 months ago. Officer Daniel Driscoll, here's the report.
He reported it stolen only days before the first attack on Miss Jones in Colorado Springs involving the use of a shotgun.
According to Officer Driscoll's report, it all started when he took his car in for an oil change.
It's going to be about 2 hours. You want to drop off or wait?
No way.
Okay, thank you.
But about 15 minutes later, Officer Driscoll began to worry that he left his shotgun in the trunk of the vehicle.
Excuse me. I need to check something in the trunk real fast.
No problem. There a problem?
No problem. Thank you.
Driscoll assumed the shotgun was back at his house under lock and key. But when he returned home, he realized that wasn't the case.
After a day of searching, he decides, no, it was in that car. So he reports it's stolen.
And let me guess, it's the same dealership Richard Cronin used to work at.
You got it.
With mounting evidence pointing at Richard Cronin, Sergeant Brown decides to take a run at him.
So, Richard, here we are. Let's just make this easy on both of us. We know you tried to kidnap at least 2 women, and we know you killed Elaine Schaefer. I've got nothing to say to you. How many others were there? Who else did you rape, kill? Piss off. I want a lawyer. You better get a good one.
Though Richard Cronin isn't talking, the final analysis of the rape kit comes in, and it speaks volumes about Cronin's connection to the crime.
The pubic hair found at the autopsy was a match to Richard Cronin. There are fibers from the blouse worn by the victim attached to the Velcro closure on Mr. Cronin's jacket that was taken from him the day of his arrest.
Based on the evidence, Kenda believes Elaine Schaefer wasn't the first woman Richard Cronin attacked.
Thanks.
Great.
But she was likely the first one he murdered.
She is observed by Richard Cronin, who is hunting that particular night. He's hunting for a target because he is a wolf. Was he on a roll? Had he made a decision that this was his new life? Kidnapping and rape? Maybe serial killing as well. Because he now has her in his control, he takes the opportunity to sexually assault her.
Pull over.
Why? What are you gonna do?
I said pull over!
after he sexually assaults her, she either says something to him or tries to escape. And his rage that's in him from drug use kicks in. He strikes her probably with the butt of that shotgun and makes her bleed, drags her out in that field, and empties that gun into her. He didn't have to. He wanted to. Then he goes home. He goes home to sleep with his wife.
In December 1988, Richard Cronin pleads guilty to felony murder and is sentenced to life in prison.
An innocent life taken, grandchildren who'll never know their grandmother, children who'll never see their mother again, because a monster has interrupted them, for no reason at all other than self-gratification.
I really want to tell my mom, look at the wonderful grandchildren she has. I know she's overseeing them. I can feel her. I can see it in my children. But I know she's here with me.
The innocent always suffer. That's why I did what I did for a living.
The night Berlin exhaled its last breath of winter, the city was still learning how to be whole again, and somewhere between two flickering street lamps in Prenzlauer Berg, a scream never made it into the morning papers, because no one heard it, or maybe everyone did and chose to forget, and that's how the cold case began, not with sirens, not with headlines, but with silence thick enough to swallow a life whole. It was March of 1991, reunification still raw, concrete dust still clinging to boots and memories, and the city moved like a bruised animal, wary, distracted, convinced that the worst was already over, until dawn pulled back the curtain on a stairwell that smelled of iron and damp stone, and a body that didn't belong there, or anywhere, anymore. She was found face down between the second and third floor, her coat half-buttoned, one shoe missing, blood dark and tacky against the cold tiles, as if the building itself had tried and failed to absorb what had happened. Her name would come later. At first, she was just another number, another scene cordoned off by plastic tape that fluttered like nervous flags, another shock to a community already numb from years of watching borders shift and truths collapse. Neighbors leaned out of cracked doors, whispering, counting the police cars, reading the fear on each other's faces without saying a word, because in Berlin in 1991, everyone had learned that words could be dangerous, and questions even more so. The first officers on scene moved fast, but not fast enough to outrun the sense that something was wrong in a way reports couldn't quite capture. There were no signs of forced entry. No witnesses who would admit to seeing anything. No weapon left behind. Just blunt force trauma to the head, defensive wounds on the hands, and a trail of smeared blood that suggested a struggle cut short, violent, personal. The coroner would later estimate time of death between midnight and 2 a.m., a window wide enough for half the city to pass through unnoticed, especially a city still awake, still restless, still haunted. Her identification came from a handbag found 2 floors below, tossed like an afterthought. Anna Keller. 28 years old. A freelance translator. Recently moved from Leipzig. No criminal record. No known enemies. She lived alone in a rented apartment 2 blocks away, a place with mismatched furniture and unpacked boxes, the kind of temporary life people led when they believed the future was finally theirs to shape. Friends would say she was cautious, private, excited about the changes sweeping through Berlin, excited and a little afraid, the way everyone was. None of them could explain why she'd been in that building that night, or who she might have been with, or why she never made it home. The headlines the next day were sharp and breathless. Brutal murder. Young woman slain. Community in shock. The words cold case wouldn't appear yet, but the seed was already there, buried beneath official statements and carefully chosen phrases. Police assured the public they were following strong leads. Detectives canvassed the area, knocking on doors, collecting half-memories and nervous denials. Someone thought they heard footsteps running. Someone else remembered a man smoking by the entrance, tall, maybe, or maybe not. A woman on the top floor claimed she'd been awake all night and heard nothing at all. Berlin was full of people who had learned how not to hear. Inside Anna's apartment, investigators found little to anchor themselves to. No signs of a break-in. No obvious motive. A calendar on the wall with a few dates circled. A notebook filled with neat handwriting, fragments of translation work, grocery lists, a phone number without a name beside it. The landline showed one missed call earlier that evening, untraceable with the technology of the time, another loose thread in a case already fraying at the edges. They bagged what they could, photographed what mattered, and left with the uneasy sense that the answers were somewhere just out of reach, watching them leave. Weeks turned into months. The city moved on, as cities do, trading one shock for another, one headline for the next. The investigation slowed, then stalled. Tips dried up. Leads collapsed under scrutiny. A man briefly detained was released for lack of evidence. Another suspect disappeared across the former border, his trail vanishing into bureaucratic fog. Files thickened, then gathered dust. Anna Keller's name slipped from public conversation, surviving only in a framed photo at a small memorial service, in the quiet grief of her parents, in the unanswered questions that followed every official update. The case went cold without ceremony, without closure, without justice. But cold cases don't die. They wait. Years later, detectives who had cut their teeth on fresh crimes would pull the file from the archive, flipping through yellowed pages, trying to see what their predecessors might have missed. The photos were grainy. The notes were sparse. Evidence handling in the early 90s had been inconsistent at best, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of cases flooding a newly unified system. Still, something nagged at them. A detail that didn't fit. A decision that felt rushed. The building where Anna was found had never been fully examined beyond the stairwell. The list of residents at the time was incomplete. Entire lives had slipped through cracks created by history itself. One detective, years into the review, fixated on a single item logged and forgotten, a fiber recovered from Anna's coat, dark, synthetic, initially dismissed as common, inconclusive. At the time, it had led nowhere. No match. No database robust enough to matter. It sat in evidence storage like a whisper no one had the tools to hear. Another anomaly surfaced alongside it, a partial fingerprint lifted from the railing, too smudged to be useful back then, catalogued, labeled, ignored. Together, they formed a question mark at the center of the file, quiet but persistent. The community around Prenzlauer Berg had changed by then. Cafes replaced crumbling storefronts. Young families pushed strollers where squatters once argued politics. The building itself had been renovated, its stairwell repainted, its tiles replaced, erasing the physical memory of that night even as the case lingered in administrative limbo. New tenants walked those steps without knowing what had happened there, or maybe sensing it without words, a chill that didn't quite go away no matter how bright the lighting. For Anna's family, time did nothing to dull the edges. Every anniversary reopened the wound. Every rumor of progress sparked cautious hope, followed by familiar disappointment. They learned the language of investigations, the meaning of phrases like ongoing review and no new developments, learned to read between the lines of press statements crafted to say nothing at all. The cold case became part of their identity, an unwanted inheritance passed down through years that refused to bring answers. Behind closed doors, police debated whether the case was worth the resources it demanded. Files like Anna Keller's filled entire rooms, monuments to unfinished work, to moments when the system failed or simply ran out of time. But something about Berlin 1991 refused to stay buried. Maybe it was the brutality. Maybe it was the timing. Or maybe it was the uneasy feeling that in the chaos of a city reinventing itself, someone had gotten away with murder, confident that history would cover their tracks. As technology advanced, so did the possibilities. Old evidence could speak in new ways. Databases grew. Techniques sharpened. The forgotten fiber and the smudged print were retrieved, re-examined under lights that hadn't existed when Anna was alive. Technicians worked methodically, aware that every test carried the weight of decades, that a single result could resurrect a case or finally lay it to rest. The past, long silent, was being asked to testify. And yet, even as the machinery of modern investigation whirred back to life, the core mystery remained intact. Who met Anna Keller that night? Why she entered a building she didn't live in? What words were exchanged before violence erupted? Whether the person responsible walked free for years, blending into the crowds, starting families, aging without consequence. The questions hovered, heavy, unanswered, casting long shadows over every new development. Berlin had changed, but the night of her death had not. It stayed exactly where it was, preserved in reports and memories, waiting for the moment when forgotten evidence might finally crack a brutal murder, or expose how fragile the idea of resolution really is. In the quiet spaces between progress and doubt, the cold case breathed on, unfinished, watching as the present edged closer to a truth that still refused to fully reveal itself. The file came back to life without ceremony, no announcement, no press release, just the soft scrape of cardboard on metal as a box was pulled from a shelf and placed under fluorescent light, and with it the weight of 30 years settled onto the desk of a new detective who had been a teenager when Berlin was still divided and now found himself staring at a past that refused to stay put. He read the reports slowly, absorbing the clipped language of another era, noting what was there and what was conspicuously absent, the gaps between facts where assumptions had quietly taken root, and he felt it almost immediately, that familiar unease, the sense that the story everyone thought they knew was missing something essential, something small enough to overlook and large enough to matter. The evidence inventory was thin, but not empty. Clothing. Photographs. A handbag. The fiber. The partial print. Items tagged, dated, initialed by hands long since retired or buried. In the early 90s, the focus had been speed, reassurance, the need to show a shaken public that order still existed, that the new Berlin was safe, controllable, forward-looking. Corners were cut not out of malice, but exhaustion, confusion, and institutional overload no one had prepared for. Thousands of cases flooded in as systems merged, records clashed, personnel shifted. In that chaos, Anna Keller's murder had become one tragedy among many, its urgency diluted by history itself. The detective started with the building. He pulled municipal records, cross-referenced names, traced residency changes over decades. In 1991, the stairwell where Anna died had served 12 apartments, some occupied legally, others not, a mix of long-term tenants, temporary lodgers, and people who left little more than a name behind. Several residents from that period were deceased. Others had moved abroad. A few could not be located at all, their paper trails dissolving somewhere between reunification and the digital age. It was the perfect environment for anonymity, for a person to exist briefly and vanish without leaving a ripple. Old witness statements were revisited, read not for what they said, but for what they avoided. The woman who claimed to hear nothing. The man who remembered a smoker but no face. The neighbor who insisted the stairwell light had been broken for weeks, contradicting maintenance logs that showed a repair just days before the murder. Each inconsistency was small, deniable on its own, but together they formed a pattern of uncertainty that felt less like coincidence and more like discomfort, a collective reluctance to see too clearly in a time when seeing had consequences. Then there was Anna herself, reduced in the file to age, occupation, address, as if a life could be summarized so neatly. The detective dug deeper, speaking to surviving friends, former colleagues, distant relatives. Time had reshaped their memories, softened some edges, sharpened others. They remembered her laugh, quick and unexpected. Her habit of writing notes to herself in the margins of books. Her cautious optimism about Berlin, the way she talked about opportunity with a hint of suspicion, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. None of them knew of enemies. None recalled threats. But one detail surfaced again and again, a subtle shift in tone when they spoke of her last weeks, a sense that she'd been distracted, guarded, preoccupied with something she wasn't ready to share. A former coworker mentioned a project Anna had been working on, a translation job that paid unusually well for a freelancer still finding her footing. The client's name was vague in her memory, foreign-sounding, maybe Eastern European, maybe not. Payment had been in cash, which at the time hadn't seemed strange, but now stood out like a bruise. No contract had been found in Anna's apartment, no correspondence beyond a few cryptic notes in her notebook, fragments of language, references to meetings postponed, locations crossed out and rewritten. One address appeared twice, both times scratched over so heavily the paper nearly tore. The detective mapped those addresses. One led to a cafe that no longer existed. Another pointed to a building only 3 blocks from where Anna was killed, a former office space used briefly in the early 90s by various short-lived enterprises, consulting firms, import-export operations that sprang up and collapsed as quickly as the economy shifted. Records were incomplete. Ownership unclear. It was another dead end that felt too convenient, another place where answers should have been and weren't. Back in the lab, the forgotten fiber was examined again. Under modern analysis, its composition narrowed. Not just synthetic, but a specific blend used in work jackets popular among security personnel in the late 80s and early 90s, mass-produced, widely distributed, but not universal. The partial fingerprint, enhanced with updated techniques, revealed enough ridge detail to enter into national databases that hadn't existed when it was first lifted. The results were not immediate. Weeks passed. The detective waited, juggling other cases, checking his phone more often than he liked to admit. When the alert finally came, it wasn't a name, but a match category, a probability range that suggested the print was consistent with an individual who had once been questioned in an unrelated investigation, a man whose record was thin, whose movements in 1991 were poorly documented, whose connection to Anna Keller was non-existent on paper. It was the kind of lead that could change everything or collapse under scrutiny, the kind that demanded caution as much as excitement. The man had worked briefly as a night security guard for a private firm that no longer existed, assigned to various properties across Berlin, including, according to fragmentary payroll logs, a building in Prenzlauer Berg during the winter of 1990 into early 1991. The address matched. Not Anna's building, but close enough to make the coincidence uncomfortable. His name appeared nowhere in the original case file, a gap that raised more questions than it answered. Why hadn't he been interviewed? Was he overlooked or deliberately excluded? Had his presence simply been lost in the noise of a city overwhelmed? Tracking him down took time. He had moved frequently, held short-term jobs, left little behind. When he was finally located, he was older, heavier, living quietly in a different part of the country, a man who looked like thousands of others, indistinguishable, forgettable. When questioned, he denied knowing Anna Keller. Denied being in the building that night. Denied everything with the calm assurance of someone who had rehearsed these answers, or perhaps simply believed that enough time had passed to make truth irrelevant. The detective listened, watched for cracks, noted the way the man's hands tightened when the stairwell was mentioned, the slight pause before he answered questions about 1991, the way his memory sharpened when it served him and blurred when it didn't. None of it was proof. All of it was suggestive. The fiber. The print. The proximity. Pieces of a puzzle that still refused to lock into place. As whispers of renewed investigation began to circulate, the media stirred. A cold case reopened. Forgotten evidence. The promise of resolution after decades of silence. Headlines grew bold again, echoing the language of the past, offering the public a narrative of progress, of justice delayed but not denied. For Anna's family, the attention was a double-edged blade, cutting open old wounds even as it hinted at answers long withheld. They were careful now, wary of hope, braced for disappointment. Inside the investigation, tension mounted. Every step forward seemed to cast longer shadows backward, raising uncomfortable questions about institutional failure, about what had been missed, ignored, or sacrificed in the rush of history. If this man was responsible, he had lived free for decades, benefited from a moment when systems faltered and oversight slipped. If he wasn't, the case risked becoming another false dawn, another chapter in a story defined by absence. The detective returned again and again to the stairwell, standing where Anna had fallen, imagining the sounds, the movements, the sudden violence erupting in a place designed for passing through, not stopping. He pictured the struggle, the fear, the desperation, the moment when help was close enough to almost touch and yet impossibly far away. He wondered how many people had walked those steps since, unaware, untouched by the echo of that night. As the investigation edged closer to a confrontation with the past, one truth became impossible to ignore. Even if a name could be attached to the crime, even if forgotten evidence could crack open the narrative, the damage done by time could not be undone. Berlin 1991 had shaped this case as much as any individual, wrapping it in layers of change, loss, and reinvention. And somewhere between what could be proven and what could only be felt, the cold case waited, poised between resolution and uncertainty, ready to remind everyone involved that some answers arrive too late to heal, and some mysteries resist closure no matter how bright the light turned upon them. By the time the investigation reached its third decade, the case had begun to exert a strange gravity of its own, pulling in people who had never known Anna Keller, drawing them toward a night that refused to stay confined to the past, and inside the department there was a quiet understanding that if this renewed effort failed, it would likely be the last, not because the questions had been answered, but because time itself was running out on the people who still remembered how to ask them. The detective felt that pressure in every meeting, every briefing, the unspoken knowledge that history was watching, waiting to see whether Berlin would finally confront one of its forgotten ghosts. The suspect's denial forced the team to widen the lens. They reconstructed his movements in 1991 using whatever fragments they could recover: employment slips, handwritten rosters, faded logbooks salvaged from storage rooms scheduled for demolition. Security work in that era had been informal, loosely regulated, reliant on trust and improvisation. Guards moved between sites with minimal oversight, their presence noted only when something went wrong. It was a profession that offered invisibility as much as responsibility, and for someone intent on leaving no trace, it was the perfect cover. One logbook, nearly illegible, placed the suspect on night duty less than 500 meters from the stairwell where Anna was killed. Another showed a gap, a 2-hour window where no assignment was recorded, explained away at the time as a clerical error. In the early 90s, such discrepancies were common, dismissed as paperwork failures in an overstretched system. Now, they felt heavier, more deliberate. The team mapped the routes between sites, timing the walk, imagining a man moving through half-lit streets, blending into the nocturnal rhythm of a city that never quite slept. They turned back to Anna's final hours, reconstructing them minute by minute. Witnesses from a bar near Alexanderplatz remembered her there that evening, alone, nursing a drink, speaking briefly with a man whose description shifted with each retelling: dark jacket, average height, accent hard to place. She left around 11, declined an offer to share a taxi, stepped into the cold with the confidence of someone who believed the night still belonged to her. From there, the trail thinned to nothing, until it reappeared in blood and silence. Phone records offered little, but one anomaly stood out. A payphone call made from a booth 2 streets from the crime scene at 11:47 p.m., dialed to a number listed in Anna's notebook, the one without a name. The call lasted less than a minute. No recording existed. The booth had been removed years ago. It was another fleeting intersection, 2 lives brushing past each other in a way that left almost no mark. The team tracked the number to a line registered to a defunct business, the same short-lived firm that once occupied the office space near Anna's scratched-out address. The pattern was beginning to emerge, faint but persistent. Temporary companies. Cash payments. Nighttime meetings in borrowed spaces. A city in transition that made such arrangements not just possible, but normal. It was easy, the detective realized, to hide in 1991 Berlin, to exploit the gaps between old rules and new ones, to move through lives without ever fully entering them. Whoever killed Anna had understood that, had trusted that the city's attention was elsewhere. They re-interviewed former tenants of the building where Anna died, tracking down those who could still be found. Some were defensive, others genuinely confused, their memories eroded by time and routine. One man, now living abroad, recalled an argument in the stairwell late one night, voices raised, a woman saying no repeatedly. At the time, he had dismissed it as a domestic dispute, not his business, not his responsibility. He had gone back to bed. When told of Anna Keller, his voice broke, the weight of that choice finally landing decades too late. Another resident remembered a security guard who sometimes smoked near the entrance, friendly, talkative, always ready with a joke. She couldn't remember his name, only his laugh, sharp and sudden. When shown a photo of the suspect, older now but still recognizable, she hesitated, then nodded, uncertain but uneasy. It wasn't identification in the legal sense, but it added another layer to the growing unease surrounding him. The team brought the suspect in again, this time armed with timelines and maps, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing more than the person across the table realizes. They spoke of the bar, the payphone, the office space, the stairwell. They watched his reactions, the subtle shifts in posture, the way his jaw tightened when Anna's name was spoken. He maintained his denials, but they were less fluid now, more defensive, as if he were shoring up a story under pressure. Forensic results trickled in, never all at once, always in fragments that demanded interpretation. The fiber analysis suggested prolonged contact, not a brief brush, consistent with a struggle. The fingerprint probability tightened, moving from possible to likely. Still not enough. Never quite enough. The law demanded certainty, and the case offered only accumulation, a mosaic of implication without a single decisive piece. Outside the investigation, the story took on a life of its own. Podcasts dissected every development. Armchair detectives argued theories late into the night. Some were convinced the case was solved, that justice was finally at hand. Others warned of tunnel vision, of the dangers of forcing closure onto a story that resisted it. Anna Keller became a symbol, her face reproduced endlessly, her life distilled into a cautionary tale about violence and memory. The real woman, with her private hopes and fears, threatened to disappear beneath the weight of narrative. The detective felt the tension between truth and resolution growing sharper. He knew that even if the suspect were charged, even if a court accepted the evidence, there would always be questions that could not be answered, moments lost to time, decisions made in shadows. And if the case failed again, if it slipped back into the archive, it would do so with greater finality, a tacit admission that some crimes survive not because they are unsolvable, but because the world around them moves on too quickly. Late one night, alone in the office, he reread Anna's notebook, lingering on the crossed-out addresses, the fragmented phrases. One line, previously overlooked, caught his attention, a note scribbled in the margin, "If he cancels again, meet anyway?" It was not evidence. It was not proof. But it was a window into a moment of decision, a choice that may have altered everything. A woman weighing caution against obligation, routine against instinct, stepping into a stairwell that would become the last place she ever stood. The investigation pressed forward, inch by inch, aware that the line between solving a cold case and reopening an old wound was thin and easily crossed. As Berlin prepared to mark yet another anniversary of reunification, banners and speeches celebrating progress and unity, the shadow of 1991 lingered, a reminder that not all stories end when the city decides to move on. Somewhere in the overlap between past and present, the truth about Anna Keller waited, fragile, contested, and still capable of unsettling a community that had long believed it had left that night behind. As the case pushed deeper into its fourth decade, the investigation began to feel less like a search for answers and more like an excavation, every movement careful, deliberate, aware that one wrong strike could collapse what little structure remained. Inside the department, the mood shifted from cautious optimism to something harder, sharper, a collective resolve shaped by the understanding that this was no longer just about identifying a suspect, but about confronting the way time, silence, and institutional fatigue had conspired to protect someone for far too long. The cold case was no longer sleeping. It was restless. The suspect's past became a landscape of half-truths and vanishing points. Financial records from the early 90s were scarce, but what existed hinted at instability, cash payments, irregular deposits, periods of unexplained income followed by stretches of nothing at all. He had drifted through jobs, through cities, through relationships, leaving behind little more than administrative residue. Former coworkers described him as competent, quiet, eager to take extra shifts. None remembered him as violent. None remembered him particularly well. He was the kind of man systems forget easily, and that forgetfulness now felt like complicity. The team revisited the defunct security firm, tracking down its former owner, a man who had reinvented himself several times since reunification, each new business scrubbing away traces of the last. When questioned, he claimed faulty memory, blamed the chaos of the era, insisted that records had been lost in moves and mergers. But under sustained pressure, details surfaced. Guards sometimes worked unofficial shifts. Assignments were swapped without documentation. Oversight was minimal. If someone wanted to disappear for a night, there were ways to make it happen. The owner shrugged as he spoke, as if describing a minor inconvenience rather than a vulnerability that might have cost a woman her life. Meanwhile, forensic specialists pushed the limits of what old evidence could still offer. Advances in DNA technology promised answers where none had existed before, but the reality was messier. Biological material on Anna's clothing was degraded, contaminated by handling, by time, by the well-meaning but imperfect procedures of 1991. Tests were run and rerun, each result accompanied by margins of error that refused to shrink. The science whispered possibilities but stopped short of declarations. It was enough to deepen suspicion, not enough to silence doubt. The detective found himself returning to the idea of motive, the missing piece that could transform a collection of circumstances into a coherent narrative. Why Anna? Why that night? The translation work resurfaced again and again, its shadow stretching across every lead. Attempts to trace the mysterious client stalled, names leading to shell companies dissolved long ago, phone numbers disconnected, addresses repurposed. It was as if the work itself had been designed to vanish, leaving only its consequences behind. If Anna had stumbled into something dangerous, she had done so quietly, without leaving the kind of trail investigators depend on. A breakthrough came not from evidence, but from memory. A retired police clerk, contacted almost as an afterthought, recalled an incident report filed weeks after the murder, unrelated on the surface, involving a disturbance near the same office space linked to Anna's notes. At the time, it had been categorized as minor, resolved without charges. The file had been misfiled, then forgotten. When retrieved, it described a late-night argument, raised voices, a security guard called to intervene. The name listed was incomplete, misspelled, but close enough to send a ripple through the team. It placed the suspect in proximity not just to the building, but to the world Anna may have been navigating in her final days. They confronted him with this new thread, watching as he struggled to place the memory, then denied it entirely. His confidence wavered. He corrected himself mid-sentence. He asked for questions to be repeated. Small cracks, but cracks nonetheless. Still, he refused to confess. He insisted that any overlap was coincidence, that the city was full of them in those days, lives intersecting briefly and moving on. The detective knew that without a confession or irrefutable forensic proof, the case remained precarious, balanced on inference and accumulation. Public interest intensified. Each development was parsed, debated, amplified. The phrase cold case solved appeared more frequently, a declaration that felt premature, almost superstitious, as if saying it enough times might make it true. For the investigators, the noise was a distraction, a reminder of how easily narrative can outpace reality. They knew better than to celebrate too soon. They had seen cases collapse under the weight of expectation, watched years of work undone by a single unanswered question. Anna's parents, now elderly, were kept informed, their reactions measured, guarded. Hope had become something they rationed carefully, aware of how painful its withdrawal could be. They asked practical questions. What could be proven? What could be said in court? What might never be known? The detective answered honestly, resisting the urge to offer comfort he could not guarantee. Justice, he knew, was not a feeling but a process, and processes do not bend easily to emotion. As timelines tightened and theories solidified, an uncomfortable possibility emerged. What if the suspect had not acted alone? What if the murder was not the result of a single, spontaneous act, but the endpoint of a series of decisions made by multiple people, each assuming someone else would take responsibility? The security firm. The shadowy business. The bystanders who heard but did nothing. The investigators who moved on too quickly. The case expanded outward, implicating not just a man, but a moment in history when accountability was diffuse and consequences delayed. Late one evening, reviewing photographs from the original scene, the detective noticed something he had missed before, a small detail almost lost in the grain, a scuff mark on the stairwell wall, consistent with someone being pushed, not falling. It was subtle, ambiguous, but it aligned with the pattern emerging from the evidence. He added it to the file, another thread in a tapestry already dense with implication. It did not change the case on its own, but it reinforced the sense that Anna's death had been violent, intentional, and preventable. The suspect was placed under increased surveillance, his routines monitored, his contacts examined. He lived quietly, predictably, a life devoid of drama. There were no late-night confessions, no sudden slips. If guilt weighed on him, he carried it well. The waiting stretched on, a test of patience and endurance, the kind that breaks weaker cases. Inside the team, debates grew more intense. Was this enough? Could they proceed? Or would moving forward risk everything they had built? Berlin watched, divided between those who believed the past should remain buried and those who demanded it be exhumed no matter the cost. The city's transformation had been predicated on forward motion, on reinvention, but cases like Anna Keller's challenged that narrative, insisting that progress built on unacknowledged loss was incomplete at best, dishonest at worst. The cold case became a mirror, reflecting not just a crime, but a collective reluctance to linger in uncomfortable truths. As preparations began for a potential charge, the detective felt the familiar weight of uncertainty settle in. He knew that whatever came next would not restore Anna's life or erase decades of absence. At best, it might offer a form of recognition, an acknowledgement that what happened mattered, that it had not been entirely consumed by time. At worst, it could reopen wounds without healing them, leaving everyone involved more exposed than before. The file remained open on his desk, its pages marked with notes, questions, and possibilities. Outside, Berlin moved through another night, lights glowing in renovated apartments, footsteps echoing in stairwells newly painted and seemingly innocent. Somewhere within those ordinary sounds lingered the echo of a struggle from 1991, a reminder that even as the city rebuilt itself, some stories refused to be sealed away. The cold case pressed forward, heavy with expectation, poised on the edge of a decision that would either bring the past into the present with devastating clarity, or consign it once more to the shadows, unresolved and waiting. The decision to move forward came quietly, without applause or certainty, sealed in a conference room where the air felt heavier than usual and every sentence carried the risk of being wrong. Prosecutors reviewed the file line by line, weighing probability against proof, history against law, aware that cold cases do not forgive mistakes. To charge was to commit, not just to a theory, but to a version of the past that would be challenged, dismantled, scrutinized in public. To hesitate was to accept that Anna Keller might remain a footnote, her death forever suspended between suspicion and silence. In the end, the choice was made not because the case was perfect, but because it was alive, and letting it die again felt like a greater injustice. The suspect was arrested on a gray morning that felt deliberately unremarkable, the kind of day Berlin specializes in, low clouds pressing down, streets slick with rain. There were no cameras, no crowd, just handcuffs clicking shut and a man being led away from a life he had constructed to look unremarkable. His face revealed little, a flicker of annoyance, perhaps, or resignation, but nothing that resembled surprise. For a moment, the detective wondered if this was how it had always been meant to end, not with drama, but with a procedural inevitability, the slow grind of time finally catching up. The announcement triggered an immediate reaction. Headlines exploded. Berlin 1991 cold case solved. Forgotten evidence cracks brutal murder. The language was triumphant, definitive, eager to declare victory over decades of uncertainty. But inside the investigation, celebration was muted. Everyone involved understood how fragile this moment was, how easily the narrative could unravel once subjected to the adversarial clarity of a courtroom. Evidence that had felt compelling in isolation would now be dissected, questioned, reframed. Every gap would be exposed. Every assumption challenged. As preparations began, the team revisited every element of the case with ruthless precision. Witness statements were reevaluated, inconsistencies catalogued, memories weighed against the science of recall. The woman who heard nothing. The man who heard too much and did nothing. The security guard who laughed and smoked by the entrance. Each would be called upon to remember, to translate decades-old impressions into testimony that could withstand cross-examination. Some were cooperative. Others were defensive, resentful of being dragged back into a past they had worked hard to forget. The forensic evidence, the backbone of the prosecution, underwent its own trial before ever reaching court. Experts debated the reliability of degraded fibers, the statistical significance of partial fingerprints, the contamination risks inherent in evidence handled under outdated protocols. Defense consultants raised doubts, suggesting alternative explanations, coincidence, secondary transfer. The truth, as always, lived in the margins, where certainty eroded into probability. The detective watched these debates with a growing sense of unease, aware that the story he had come to believe might not survive translation into legal language. Anna's notebook became a focal point, its cryptic notes now framed as breadcrumbs leading to danger. Prosecutors argued that the scratched-out addresses and vague reminders suggested secret meetings, a hidden layer to Anna's life that placed her in proximity to the suspect. The defense countered that this was speculation, narrative imposed on ambiguity, that freelancers often scribble nonsense, that not every crossed outline is a clue. The notebook, once a private artifact, had become a contested object, its meaning reshaped by those who needed it to speak. As the case moved closer to trial, pressure mounted on the suspect. Interrogations resumed, this time with an urgency sharpened by the prospect of a courtroom. He remained consistent, denying involvement, denying knowledge, denying opportunity. But the detective sensed a shift, a fatigue that came from carrying a story unchanged for too long. During one session, when asked about Anna Keller directly, he paused longer than before, his gaze dropping to the table, his voice quieter when he finally spoke. It was not a confession. It was not even an admission. But it was a moment where the armor slipped, just enough to reveal that the past was not as inert as he claimed. Outside, the city reacted in waves. Some welcomed the arrest as overdue justice, proof that even the darkest corners of reunification-era chaos could be illuminated. Others were skeptical, wary of the urge to resolve old cases at any cost, suspicious of narratives that promised closure where none might exist. Online forums filled with arguments. Timelines were constructed and deconstructed. Amateur analysts pointed out flaws the professionals had already agonized over. Anna Keller's name trended again, her image circulating far beyond the neighborhoods she had known, her death recontextualized for a generation that had been children or not yet born when it happened. Her parents watched from a distance, reluctant to engage with the spectacle. They met with prosecutors privately, listened to explanations, asked questions that cut to the heart of the matter. What happens if the evidence is not enough? What happens if he is acquitted? What happens if the truth is more complicated than anyone wants to admit? There were no satisfying answers. Only honesty, delivered carefully, acknowledging that justice does not always align with certainty. The detective felt the weight of expectation settle into his bones. He reviewed the case obsessively, replaying interviews in his mind, scrutinizing photographs until the images blurred. He knew the defense would argue that the investigation was shaped by hindsight, that once the suspect emerged, everything else was arranged to fit him. It was a familiar critique, and not an entirely unfair one. Human beings seek patterns. Investigators are not immune. The challenge lay in separating coherence from convenience, truth from narrative. As trial approached, a new development threatened to destabilize everything. A former employee of the defunct office business came forward, claiming that Anna had indeed worked for the company briefly, that her translations involved sensitive material related to property transfers during the chaotic early days of reunification. The claim was impossible to fully verify, records long destroyed or lost. But it introduced another potential motive, another layer of complexity. If Anna had known too much, if her death was tied to something larger than a chance encounter, the case risked expanding beyond the suspect, beyond the tidy boundaries the prosecution needed. The revelation sparked heated debate within the team. Some saw it as corroboration, proof that Anna's life had intersected with dangerous forces, increasing the likelihood that someone like the suspect, operating on the margins, could have been involved. Others worried it muddied the waters, introduced alternative suspects, alternative explanations that the defense would exploit. The detective felt torn, recognizing the importance of the information while fearing its consequences. Cold cases thrive on clarity. This was anything but. In the final weeks before trial, every decision felt amplified. What to include? What to exclude? How to frame the story without oversimplifying it. The prosecution rehearsed its opening statements, refining language to balance gravity and restraint. The phrase "cold case solved" was deliberately avoided in court documents, replaced by cautious assertions, careful phrasing that acknowledged uncertainty while arguing probability. It was a quieter truth, less satisfying to headlines, but more defensible under oath. The suspect was moved to a detention facility closer to the courthouse. Guards noted his compliance, his lack of outward agitation. He read. He slept. He waited. The detective wondered what he thought during those hours, whether he replayed that night, whether he had convinced himself of his own innocence, or whether the past resurfaced unbidden, sharp and unavoidable. Some crimes, he knew, fade even for those who commit them. Others linger, reshaping lives from the inside out. On the eve of trial, Berlin seemed to hold its breath. The city that had once rushed past Anna Keller's death now found itself forced to look back, to reckon with a moment when change and neglect had intersected with fatal consequences. The stairwell had long since been renovated, its surfaces clean, its history invisible. But in the courtroom, the past would be reconstructed piece by piece, its ghosts summoned by testimony and exhibits, its uncertainties laid bare. The detective closed the file late that night, aware that whatever the outcome, this chapter of the cold case was nearing its end. Whether it would conclude with conviction, acquittal, or something more ambiguous remained unknown. What was certain was that the story, once reopened, could not be neatly sealed again. It had already altered lives, reopened wounds, challenged assumptions about memory and justice. As the lights of the city glowed beyond his window, he felt the familiar mix of resolve and doubt, the knowledge that solving a brutal murder is not always about finding answers, but about deciding which questions can still be asked, and which must be carried forward, unanswered, into whatever comes next. The trial opened without spectacle, a deliberate restraint imposed by a court aware of how easily expectation can contaminate judgment, and as the first day unfolded, it became clear that this was not going to be a story of clean lines and dramatic revelations, but of pressure applied slowly, methodically, to memories already worn thin by time. The courtroom felt smaller than it should have, the air dense with the accumulated weight of decades, every bench occupied by people who had come not just to hear a verdict, but to witness whether the past could still be held accountable. The prosecution began by reconstructing Berlin in 1991, not as nostalgia, but as context, a city in flux, its institutions stretched, its citizens learning new rules faster than they could internalize them. They spoke of opportunity and disorder in the same breath, of how anonymity flourished in the gaps between systems, and how violence could hide there, unremarked. Anna Keller's life was introduced carefully, almost gently, her youth, her work, her optimism framed not as tragedy bait, but as the baseline from which everything had been taken. The jury listened, some nodding, others guarded, absorbing a narrative that asked them to imagine a world both familiar and distant. Witnesses followed, each bringing their fragment of 1991 into the room. The bar patron who remembered Anna that night described her as calm, polite, unhurried, someone who didn't seem afraid. The memory carried an unintended sting, a reminder that danger rarely announces itself. The former tenant who recalled the argument in the stairwell spoke haltingly, his voice catching as he admitted to doing nothing, to assuming it wasn't his problem. The defense pressed him, questioned the reliability of his memory, suggested suggestion, media influence, the distortions of guilt. He agreed to all of it, his certainty dissolving even as his regret remained intact. The woman who remembered the security guard was less confident. Time had softened her recollection, blurred faces and voices. When asked to identify the defendant, she hesitated, then shook her head, unwilling to overstate what she could no longer be sure of. The prosecution accepted the limitation, the defense seized on it, emphasizing the dangers of retrofitting memory to theory. It was a reminder that truth in cold cases is often negotiated, not discovered whole. Forensic experts took the stand next, bringing with them the language of probability and margin, charts and diagrams translating microscopic traces into courtroom terms. The fiber analysis was explained in detail, its rarity contextualized without exaggeration. The partial fingerprint followed, its statistical significance laid bare, impressive but not definitive. The defense countered with their own experts, who spoke of contamination, of secondary transfer, of how easily certainty can be overstated when the desire for resolution looms large. The jury watched as science became argument, its authority both invoked and undermined. The suspect himself sat quietly throughout, his demeanor studied, almost neutral. When he took the stand, it was at the insistence of his defense, a calculated risk. He spoke evenly, denying involvement, offering alternative explanations for every coincidence. Yes, he worked nearby. Yes, he smoked outside buildings. Yes, he sometimes took unofficial shifts. But no, he did not know Anna Keller. No, he was not in that stairwell. No, he had nothing to do with her death. His story was internally consistent, if unremarkable, the kind of narrative that relies on the passage of time as its greatest ally. Cross-examination was relentless. The prosecution pressed on gaps, on inconsistencies between his testimony and recovered records, on the unexplained hours, the missing logs. His answers tightened, grew shorter. At one point, when asked about the night in question, he faltered, corrected himself, then insisted again on his innocence. The moment was brief, ambiguous, but it lingered in the room, a flicker of uncertainty that neither side could fully claim. The translation work surfaced mid-trial, introduced cautiously, almost reluctantly. The former employee who alleged Anna's involvement with sensitive documents testified from memory, his account fragmentary, uncorroborated. The prosecution framed it as context, a possible explanation for secrecy, 4 meetings conducted in borrowed spaces. The defense attacked it as fantasy, a late-breaking theory designed to distract from evidentiary weakness. The judge allowed it, with strict limitations, and the jury was instructed to weigh it carefully, to resist the urge to fill gaps with imagination. As days stretched into weeks, fatigue set in. Jurors struggled to hold multiple timelines in their heads, to reconcile the immediacy of testimony with the distance of the events described. The detective watched from the gallery, acutely aware of how the case he knew so intimately was being reshaped by legal necessity. Nuance was flattened. Ambiguity sharpened. What had once felt compelling in aggregate now appeared fragile when isolated, each piece vulnerable to doubt. Outside the courthouse, the narrative hardened. Media outlets framed the trial as a reckoning, a test of whether Germany could finally close one of reunification's open wounds. Others warned of overreach, of the risk of condemning a man on the strength of inference. The phrase cold case solved continued to circulate, even as the courtroom reality suggested anything but finality. Anna Keller's image appeared again and again, her smile frozen in time, her complexity reduced to a symbol everyone could project onto. Her parents attended selectively, choosing moments they felt able to endure. When they were present, the room seemed to shift around them, an unspoken acknowledgement of loss that no verdict could erase. They listened without visible reaction, their faces composed, as if emotion had long ago retreated inward, conserved for survival. During a recess, Anna's mother was overheard saying quietly that knowing what happened mattered less now than knowing it hadn't been forgotten. It was not a statement about guilt or innocence, but about recognition. Closing arguments arrived with a sense of inevitability. The prosecution asked the jury to consider the totality of the evidence, to see how individual threads formed a pattern too consistent to ignore. They acknowledged uncertainty, framed it as an inherent feature of cold cases, argued that waiting for perfect proof would mean accepting perpetual impunity. The defense urged restraint, reminding the jury that suspicion, however strong, is not evidence, that the burden of proof had not shifted with time, that the gaps in the case were not accidents but warnings. The jury was sent to deliberate. Hours passed. Then days. Each delay fed speculation, hope and dread cycling in equal measure. The detective replayed testimony in his mind, searching for an angle he might have missed, a detail that could tip the balance. He knew better than to expect clarity. Verdicts, like memories, are constructed under pressure. When the jury returned, the room held its breath. The foreperson read the verdict, the words measured, precise. Not guilty. The sound was not dramatic, not explosive. It settled slowly, like dust. The defendant exhaled, his shoulders dropping, a life redirected by a handful of syllables. Anna's parents remained still, absorbing the decision without visible reaction, grief and resignation intertwined too tightly to separate. The judge thanked the jury, reminded the room of the gravity of their task, of the difference between legal proof and moral certainty. The court adjourned. The case, legally speaking, was over. The cold case had not been solved in the way headlines had promised. It had been tested, illuminated, and found wanting by the standards that govern freedom and punishment. Outside, reactions fractured along familiar lines. Some decried the verdict as a failure of justice, proof that time protects the guilty. Others defended it as a necessary safeguard against conviction by narrative. The detective felt neither anger nor relief, only a profound exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying a question too long and setting it down without an answer. In the days that followed, the file was returned to storage, updated with trial transcripts, verdict forms, the bureaucratic markers of an ending that did not feel like one. Officially, the case remained unsolved. Unofficially, it had become something else entirely, a cautionary tale about memory, evidence, and the limits of resolution. The suspect walked free, legally cleared, though not universally believed. Anna Keller remained dead, her story unresolved, her absence undiminished. Berlin moved on, as it always does, absorbing the outcome into its layered history. The stairwell stood unchanged, its past invisible to those who passed through. But for those who had lived with the case, who had reopened it and carried it into the present, the verdict did not close the book. It simply added another chapter, one defined not by certainty, but by the uneasy knowledge that some truths, once delayed too long, resist being pinned down, leaving behind not closure, but a lingering question that refuses to fade. The acquittal did not end the case so much as it changed its temperature, cooling the public urgency while leaving the core unresolved, and in the weeks that followed, the investigation slipped into a quieter, more ambiguous phase where nothing was officially happening and yet nothing had truly stopped. Files were closed and reopened in the same breath, motions denied while questions multiplied, and inside the department there was a sense that the verdict had not answered anything, only clarified how fragile answers become when time is allowed to harden around them. The suspect returned to a life that looked, on paper, unchanged. He moved back into his apartment, resumed his routines, walked the same streets with the same unremarkable gait. Neighbors noticed him again, then stopped noticing him at all. There were no celebrations, no declarations of innocence shouted into microphones. Acquittal brought relief, perhaps, but also exposure, the quiet knowledge that freedom does not erase suspicion, it merely relocates it from the courtroom to the margins of everyday life. He avoided interviews. Declined requests to tell his story. Silence, once more, became his shield. Within the police, opinions fractured. Some believed the verdict was the correct outcome, a necessary reminder that probability cannot substitute for proof, that the system's integrity depends on restraint as much as pursuit. Others were convinced the jury had been overwhelmed, confused by complexity, unable to see the shape that investigators had lived with for years. These disagreements were rarely voiced aloud, but they influenced decisions, determined which files were quietly revisited and which were allowed to settle back into obscurity. The detective found himself returning to the case not out of duty, but compulsion. He reread transcripts, listening not for what had been said, but for what had been avoided. He noted moments where witnesses hesitated, where questions were reframed, where lines of inquiry had been cut short by legal necessity. The courtroom had demanded clarity. The truth, he suspected, lived in ambiguity. And ambiguity, once exposed, is difficult to ignore. One detail continued to trouble him, the payphone call. Less than a minute, placed from a location too convenient to dismiss, connecting Anna Keller to a number that dissolved under scrutiny. The call had been treated as context during the trial, interesting but inconclusive. Now, freed from the constraints of admissibility, it felt more significant, a pivot point around which the night might have turned. He revisited the area, walked the route again, counted the steps, timed the distance. The booth was long gone, replaced by a glass-fronted kiosk selling coffee to commuters who moved too quickly to notice anything else. He expanded the search beyond the suspect, looking again at the defunct business tied to the mysterious number. Shell companies from the early 90s were notoriously difficult to trace, their paper trails fragmented by mergers, bankruptcies, and deliberate erasure. Still, patterns emerged. Shared directors. Reused addresses. Names that appeared briefly, then vanished, only to resurface elsewhere under slightly altered spellings. It suggested not a single operation, but a network of opportunistic ventures exploiting the legal gray zones of reunification. Anna's translation work, once a peripheral detail, now moved to the center of his thinking. Translators hear things others do not. They bridge languages, cultures, intentions. They are trusted with information that assumes discretion. If Anna had been translating documents related to property transfers, financial restructuring, or political negotiations, she might have encountered material that made someone nervous, or angry, or afraid. The question was whether that risk intersected with the violence of her death, or merely paralleled it, two separate threads tangled by coincidence. A former acquaintance of Anna's, contacted again after the trial, mentioned something she had said shortly before her death, a comment dismissed at the time as anxiety. She had joked about being too useful, about knowing things she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The remark had been fleeting, easily forgotten, but now it lingered, a whisper from the past that refused to stay quiet. Memory, the detective knew, is unreliable, but patterns of memory can be telling, especially when they recur independently. The building where Anna was killed came under scrutiny once more. Renovation records revealed that during the months following the murder, several tenants moved out abruptly, their departures explained by rent increases, disputes, or vague personal reasons. One name stood out, linked loosely to the same business ecosystem that had surrounded Anna's translation work. The connection was thin, circumstantial, but it suggested proximity, the kind that invites questions rather than answers. The detective raised these points with his superiors, careful not to frame them as accusations, but as possibilities worth considering. The response was measured, cautious. The trial had consumed resources, drawn scrutiny, tested institutional patience. There was little appetite for reopening lines of inquiry that promised complexity without clear payoff. Officially, the case remained open, but the threshold for further action had risen, the bar set higher by the public failure to secure a conviction. Outside the institution, the case took on a second life. True crime forums and podcasts dissected the acquittal, some framing it as proof of systemic failure, others as evidence of responsible restraint. New theories proliferated, many implausible, some unsettlingly precise. Anna Keller's life was reimagined again and again, her choices analyzed by strangers who mistook familiarity with entitlement. The detective avoided most of it, aware that public obsession rarely clarifies truth, but he could not escape the sense that the story was slipping further from the woman at its center. For Anna's parents, the verdict had brought a strange kind of finality, not closure, but exhaustion. They declined further interviews, asked to be left alone. In private conversations, they expressed gratitude that the case had been taken seriously again, that their daughter's name had been spoken aloud in places of authority. They did not speak of justice. They spoke of memory. Of the fear that without continued attention, Anna would recede once more into the footnotes of history. The suspect's acquittal complicated everything that followed. Legally, he could not be tried again for the same crime. Investigatively, he remained a figure of interest, a man whose life intersected too neatly with too many unanswered questions. The detective knew the danger of fixation, the risk of allowing one theory to crowd out all others. And yet, letting go felt premature, almost irresponsible, given how much remained unexplained. Late one evening, reviewing old photographs yet again, he noticed a reflection in the stairwell mirror, a blurred shape that had never been enhanced because it was too indistinct to matter. Technology had advanced again since the trial. New methods promised greater clarity from degraded images. He flagged the frame, sent it for analysis, uncertain whether it was anything at all, or simply another projection born of fatigue and refusal. As weeks turned into months, the case settled into an uneasy limbo, neither active nor dormant, sustained by a handful of people who could not quite bring themselves to let it go. The city's attention drifted elsewhere, to newer scandals, fresher tragedies. Berlin, always rebuilding, layered new stories over old ones with practiced efficiency. And yet, beneath the noise, the cold case endured, altered but not erased by the verdict. It had survived neglect, resurrection, and public trial. Now it existed in a quieter form, carried forward by those who believe that acquittal is not the same as answer, and that some crimes leave traces that outlast legal outcomes. Somewhere in the space between what could be proven and what could be felt, the truth about Anna Keller remained suspended, waiting for a moment, a method, or a mistake that might finally tip the balance and force the past to speak again. Time moved differently after the trial, stretching and compressing in ways that made the case feel both distant and unbearably close, and for the detective, the work became less about momentum and more about vigilance, the quiet discipline of paying attention when everyone else had stopped looking. The file remained on his desk longer than protocol required, its edges worn soft by repetition, a physical reminder that acquittal had changed the rules but not the questions. The image from the stairwell mirror came back first, not with revelation, but with refinement. Digital enhancement pulled contrast from noise, coaxed shape from blur. It was still imperfect, still ambiguous, but something was there now, a silhouette aligned with the railing, a shoulder turned toward the camera, the suggestion of a jacket with a lighter stripe along the seam. It was not a face. It was not identification. But it was movement, presence, proof that someone else had occupied that space at that moment. The detective felt the familiar mix of excitement and restraint. He had learned not to celebrate shadows. He compared the silhouette to archived footage, uniforms from security firms operating in Berlin in the early 90s, the cut of jackets, the placement of reflective material. The match was not exact, but close enough to reopen old questions. Was this the defendant? Or someone like him? Or someone connected to the same ecosystem of informal labor and temporary authority? The image refused to commit, offering possibility without conclusion. The payphone call resurfaced again, this time through a different lens. Telecommunications experts reconstructed likely routing paths based on surviving infrastructure maps. It was slow, imprecise work, more inference than data, but it suggested the call had not been random. The number Anna dialed connected, briefly, to a switching node serving multiple lines tied to businesses that no longer existed, all registered within a narrow geographic corridor. It was not proof of coordination, but it hinted at structure, at a pattern beneath the apparent chaos. A break came from an unexpected place. A former city archivist, now retired, reached out after listening to a podcast about the case. He remembered processing boxes of documents from dissolved companies during the early 90s, records deemed insignificant, scheduled for destruction. One box, he recalled, had been mislabeled and set aside, forgotten in a storage room until the building was cleared years later. He did not know what became of it, only that it contained contracts, correspondence, foreign language documents that few people bothered to read. The detective followed the lead with tempered expectations, tracing the archivist's old workflow, identifying the storage facility, contacting its current operators. Most records from that era were gone, shredded, incinerated, erased. But a handful had survived, transferred to a secondary archive during a jurisdictional reshuffle. It was a long shot layered atop other long shots, but it was movement, and movement mattered. When the box was finally located, its contents were fragile, paper yellowed, ink fading. Among invoices and legal drafts were translations, marked with handwritten notes in the margins, corrections, questions. Some were initialed. One bore a name that made the detective stop breathing for a moment, Anna Keller. The document itself was unremarkable, a dry description of property valuation. But the date placed her involvement weeks before her death, and the client listed matched, loosely, one of the shell entities connected to the mysterious phone number. The discovery did not rewrite the case. It complicated it. It suggested Anna had been closer to the center of something opaque than previously proven, that her work had intersected with forces operating in legal gray zones, possibly with stakes high enough to make someone nervous. But it did not point to a killer. It did not tie directly to the acquitted suspect. It widened the field rather than narrowing it, opening the door to actors who had never been considered, some of whom might now be unreachable. The detective briefed his superiors again, this time with documentation rather than inference. The response was cautious but engaged. The finding was acknowledged as significant, historically if not legally. A small task force was authorized, limited in scope, designed to explore the business network without reopening the murder investigation in name. It was a compromise, an attempt to honor the new information without reigniting public controversy. As the team traced the network, a picture began to form of a city exploited during transition, properties shuffled, ownership obscured, profits moved quickly and quietly. Security personnel appeared again and again, not as masterminds, but as intermediaries, facilitators, men paid to be present, to smooth edges, to discourage questions. Violence was rare, but the threat of it lingered, an unspoken understanding that some boundaries should not be crossed. Anna's role within this world remained unclear. She might have been peripheral, translating without context. Or she might have understood more than she let on, enough to make her uneasy, enough to place her in the wrong stairwell at the wrong time. The notebook entries took on new resonance, the scratched-out addresses now possible meeting points, the hesitation captured in her marginal note suddenly more ominous. Publicly, nothing changed. The case remained unsolved. The acquittal stood. Media interest waned. But for those still involved, the ground had shifted. The story was no longer just about a suspect who walked free, but about a web of activity that had thrived in the blind spots of a changing city. The murder could no longer be isolated from its context. It was embedded in it. Anna's parents were informed quietly of the new findings. They listened, asked few questions, absorbed the information with a weary attentiveness. For them, the idea that their daughter's death might be connected to something larger offered no comfort, only a different kind of ache. It did not bring her back. It did not guarantee answers. It merely expanded the landscape of loss. The detective felt a shift in his own thinking. He had spent years pursuing a person. Now he was chasing a system, or at least its residue, the traces it left behind when it moved on. Systems are harder to confront than individuals. They do not sit in interview rooms. They do not contradict themselves. They dissolve, reassemble, hide in plain sight. As autumn settled over Berlin, the case existed in two parallel states, officially dormant, unofficially alive. The stairwell image remained pinned above the detective's desk, a reminder of presence without identity. The translated document was catalogued, preserved, a tangible link between Anna and a world that had previously been speculative. Together, they formed a new axis around which the cold case revolved. There was no revelation, no turning point that promised resolution. Only the slow accumulation of context, the sense that the truth, whatever it was, had been shaped by forces larger than any single act. In that understanding lay a different kind of tension, one less about whodunit and more about how easily a life can be consumed by moments of transition, by spaces where rules blur and accountability thins. The detective closed the file again, aware that it might not be opened officially for some time, perhaps ever. But the case no longer felt static. It felt unfinished in a way that resisted erasure, as if the city itself were holding on to it, waiting for a future in which the past could be read more clearly. Until then, the cold case remained what it had always been, a story of absence, shaped by silence, refusing to resolve, lingering in the shadows of a Berlin that had learned to live with ghosts. Winter sharpened the city, stripping Berlin down to angles and echoes, and in that stripped-down state the case seemed to breathe again, not louder, but clearer, every sound carrying farther in the cold air, every absence more defined. The task force worked without fanfare, names kept off memos, meetings held in borrowed rooms, because the past they were digging through was not just old, it was inconvenient, threaded with people who had learned how to survive transitions by staying unremarkable. One name kept reappearing, never in bold, never as a principal, always in the margins, a subcontractor here, a consultant there, a man who registered companies and dissolved them with equal ease. His signatures were inconsistent, his addresses temporary, his trail fragmented by design. He was not a suspect in any traditional sense. He had not been near the building on the night Anna died. There was no witness who could place him in the stairwell, no record of a call, no fingerprint waiting to be rediscovered. What he had was proximity to everyone else, a gravitational pull that drew disparate elements into a loose orbit around him. The detective did not pursue him directly. He followed the gaps instead, the spaces where his presence should have been documented but was not. Those gaps led to a defunct security firm, one that had operated briefly during the early 90s, staffed by men whose resumes were thin and whose references pointed nowhere. Employment records were incomplete, but one name surfaced that made the detective pause. It was familiar, not because it was prominent, but because it had been scrubbed so thoroughly. A man connected to the firm had also appeared, fleetingly, in the acquitted suspect's past, a shared address, a shared night shift years earlier. The connection was tenuous, almost embarrassing in its fragility, but it suggested overlap, a point where two lines that had been treated as separate might have crossed. The detective felt the familiar pull of caution. This was the kind of detail that could inflate itself into meaning if handled carelessly. He resisted the urge to build a narrative around it. Instead, he asked questions, quiet ones, the kind that did not announce their intent. One answer came from an unexpected source. A former building manager, now living outside the city, remembered the security firm vaguely, remembered men who did not wear standard uniforms, who carried radios that crackled with unfamiliar codes. He remembered being told not to log certain patrols, not to ask why. His memory was imprecise, softened by time, but it aligned with the pattern emerging elsewhere: presence without record, authority without accountability. The stairwell itself became a focus again, not as a crime scene, but as a space. Architects and safety experts examined the building's original plans, noting sightlines, blind corners, acoustics. They reconstructed how sound traveled, how footsteps might echo or disappear, how a brief struggle could be masked by the building's own noise. The analysis suggested that someone familiar with the structure could move through it efficiently, quietly, choosing moments when chance would do the rest. Anna's last known movements were recharted with this new understanding. The timing of her return, the decision to use the stairwell rather than the elevator, the brief stop on the landing. None of it was conclusive, but it felt less random now, more like a sequence shaped by subtle pressures, by the awareness that she was not alone, even if she could not yet name why. A new witness surfaced, reluctantly. She had lived in the building at the time, a student, barely mentioned in the original files because her statement had seemed irrelevant. She had heard voices that night, not raised, not arguing, just close, too close. She had assumed it was a couple. She had moved on. Decades later, she described the tone again: uncertain, transactional, a conversation that did not belong in a stairwell. Her memory was fragile, but the emotional residue was intact. She remembered feeling watched afterward, though she never saw anyone. The legal value of her recollection was limited. Memory decays, testimony blurs. But emotionally, it mattered. It added texture, human presence, the sense that the moment had been occupied by intention, not accident. It reinforced the idea that Anna's death had not been a sudden eruption of violence, but the end of a process already in motion. The acquitted suspect was not brought back into the spotlight. Legally, he could not be. But his history was re-examined with different questions. Not did he do it, but how did he fit? His employment gaps, his debts, his abrupt relocations took on new significance when viewed as responses rather than causes. He began to look less like a lone actor and more like a node, someone who had been close enough to the center to be useful, distant enough to be expendable. The detective felt the weight of that realization. Cold cases often promise catharsis, the satisfaction of a name, a motive, a clean line from act to consequence. This one resisted that shape. It suggested a truth that would not fit into a courtroom, a truth composed of incentives and silences, of people doing what they were told because not doing it felt riskier. Media interest flickered again as rumors leaked, vague references to new directions and forgotten evidence. Headlines danced around the edges without committing to substance. The city responded with a familiar mix of curiosity and fatigue. Some wanted closure. Others wanted the past left alone. The detective watched it unfold from a distance, careful not to feed the cycle. Anna's image appeared briefly on a late-night segment, her photograph accompanied by words like unsolved and mystery. The framing felt inadequate, flattening a complex life into a symbol. The detective turned off the television, aware that the real work continued elsewhere, in archives, in memories, in the quiet persistence of people who refused to let the case collapse into abstraction. Internally, a line was crossed. The task force acknowledged what had been implicit for months: the case might never be solved in the way the title promised. The evidence was fragmentary, the actors dispersed, some likely dead. Accountability, if it existed, would be diffuse. The goal shifted subtly, from solving to understanding, from naming a killer to mapping the conditions that made the killing possible. This shift brought its own tension. Understanding without resolution can feel like failure. But it can also be a form of truth-telling, an insistence that some stories are bigger than their endings. The detective grappled with that distinction, aware that his own need for closure could not dictate the shape of the facts. In the cold, clear nights of that winter, Berlin felt suspended between what it had been and what it wanted to be remembered as. The case occupied that same liminal space, neither active nor closed, neither solved nor forgotten. It existed as a question that refused to settle, a reminder that transitions leave scars, and that some of those scars never fully heal. As the year turned, the detective prepared a final internal report, careful in its language, precise in its uncertainty. It did not accuse. It did not absolve. It described a network, a context, a convergence of interests that intersected, briefly and fatally, with a woman who should have been safe in her own building. It was not justice. It was documentation. The file was archived again, this time with annotations that future eyes might one day find useful. The stairwell image remained unresolved, the silhouette still a question mark. The name in the margins stayed in the margins. Nothing was finished. But the cold case had changed shape. It was no longer just a frozen moment from 1991. It was a lens through which the city could examine itself, its compromises, its forgotten corners. And in that sense, even without a verdict, it continued to matter, a quiet, persistent echo in a place that knew how to live with echoes, and how hard it was to silence them. Spring arrived without ceremony, and with it came the slow thaw of things long held rigid, not just the ground but attitudes, files, memories that had been sealed tight by cold and caution. In the administrative corridors where the case lived on paper, there was movement again, subtle, procedural, the kind that rarely made noise but changed outcomes all the same. A policy review, quietly circulated, reframed how unresolved cases from the reunification era were classified. Not reopened. Recontextualized. It was bureaucratic language, but it mattered. It allowed old material to be read without the expectation of a single culprit, without the pressure to force clarity where none existed. The detective noticed the shift immediately. Doors that had been politely closed were now ajar. Requests that once stalled were answered, sometimes with an apology, sometimes with a shrug that said time had made resistance pointless. He worked through the material again, not hunting for revelation, but for coherence, for a way to tell the story honestly without pretending it would end cleanly. One document, long overlooked because it belonged to no single category, took on new weight. It was a memo from a municipal office, written weeks before Anna's death, warning of irregularities in property transfers near transport corridors. The language was dry, careful, but the implication was clear: money was moving fast, oversight was lagging behind, and security arrangements were being handled by third parties whose authority was never fully verified. The memo had been acknowledged and filed. Nothing more. The detective placed it alongside the translated contract bearing Anna's initials, alongside the security firm records, alongside the stairwell image. Individually, each piece remained insufficient. Together, they suggested alignment, not conspiracy in the cinematic sense, but convergence, and narrowing of possibilities until coincidence began to look improbable. He resisted the urge to assign intent where only pattern existed. Years in homicide had taught him the danger of that leap. Instead, he focused on timing. Who knew what, and when? The timeline grew dense, layered, events stacking close enough to feel crowded. Anna's late nights. The sudden presence of non-standard security. The phone call. The stairwell encounter. The speed with which attention shifted away afterward. A meeting was held with legal advisors, not to strategize prosecution, but to assess exposure. The city had an interest now, not in solving a murder, but in understanding how its systems had failed, how oversight gaps had allowed private arrangements to supplant public responsibility. The conversation was cautious, words chosen for their defensibility rather than their clarity. Still, there was acknowledgement. Something had gone wrong, and it was larger than one crime. Anna's parents were invited to a briefing, framed not as an update, but as transparency. They sat across the table, hands folded, listening as the detective explained the context, the network, the absence of definitive answers. They had learned long ago not to expect closure, but the shift in tone mattered. Their daughter was no longer being discussed as an isolated victim of unknown violence, but as a person whose death intersected with forces that should have been visible, regulated, prevented. Her mother asked a single question, quietly. Was Anna afraid? The detective paused. There was no evidence of fear, no documented complaint, no warning sign that could be pointed to with certainty. But there was hesitation in her notes, there was that final call, there was the choice to take the stairs. He answered carefully. He said it was possible she was uneasy. He said it was also possible she trusted that nothing would happen. Both felt true. Outside official channels, interest grew in different ways. A researcher writing about Berlin's transition years requested access to public records. An independent filmmaker reached out, framing the case as emblematic rather than exceptional. The detective declined interviews, declined participation. He had learned that stories like this could be consumed without being understood, their complexity flattened into spectacle. Still, fragments escaped. A phrase here, a detail there. The words cold case resurfaced, now paired with systemic failure and forgotten networks. The framing shifted. The city listened differently. This was no longer just about who had done it, but about how easily responsibility could diffuse until it belonged to no one. Internally, a recommendation took shape. Not charges. Not reopening. A formal acknowledgement that the investigation had been constrained by the context of its time, that certain lines of inquiry had been inaccessible or invisible. It was not an apology. It was a record. A marker for the future, should similar patterns emerge again. The detective contributed to the draft reluctantly, aware of its limitations. He chose his words with care, avoiding speculation, grounding every assertion in documented fact. Where facts ended, he allowed space, not silence, but articulation of uncertainty. This, too, was part of the truth. As the report circulated, there was resistance, muted but present. No institution likes to document its blind spots. But the distance of decades softened the stakes. People who might once have been implicated were retired, deceased, irrelevant. The risk now was reputational, abstract, easier to absorb. One afternoon, the detective returned to the building. It had been renovated, the stairwell repainted, the lighting improved. The mirror was gone, replaced by a blank panel. Standing there, he tried to reconstruct the night, the sounds, the movement, the brief intersection of paths. It felt distant, unreal, like imagining weather long past. And yet, the space still held something, a residual tension that had nothing to do with architecture and everything to do with memory. He thought about how cases end. Sometimes with arrests. Sometimes with trials. Sometimes with certainty. And sometimes with understanding that arrives too late to change outcomes but early enough to inform the future. This case belonged to the last category, uncomfortable and unsatisfying, but not meaningless. The final version of the report was archived with a new designation. Not solved. Not closed. Contextualized. It was a small word, easy to miss, but it signaled a shift in philosophy, an acceptance that some truths resist compression into verdicts. The detective felt a strange mix of relief and frustration. Relief that the case would not be misrepresented as something it was not. Frustration that accountability remained diffuse, that no one would be called to answer directly for what had happened in that stairwell. Both emotions coexisted, unresolved. As spring deepened, the city moved on, as cities do. Construction resumed. New stories displaced old ones. But beneath the surface, the case had left a trace, not as a scandal, but as a lesson, quietly integrated into policy discussions, training modules, risk assessments. Anna's name appeared occasionally in footnotes, a reference point for why certain safeguards now existed. The detective watched this from a distance, aware that his role was ending. He had taken the case as far as it could go without fiction. That, he told himself, had to be enough. On his last day before reassignment, he removed the stairwell image from above his desk. He did not throw it away. He placed it inside the file, between the translated contract and the municipal memo, a visual reminder of presence without resolution. The silhouette remained faceless, anonymous, a symbol rather than an answer. He closed the file one final time, not with ceremony, but with intention. The cold case, reshaped but unresolved, would remain part of the city's record, its story incomplete but no longer ignored. And in that incompleteness, there was a kind of honesty, a refusal to pretend that every wound can be neatly stitched, that every shadow can be given a name. Berlin, in its endless cycles of reinvention, carried that honesty forward, quietly, into whatever came next. The reassignment came quietly, folded into routine paperwork, a transfer framed as opportunity rather than conclusion. For the detective, it felt like a full stop disguised as a comma. The case would no longer follow him daily, but it had already embedded itself deeper than any file could capture. He left his office lighter in possessions, heavier in memory, aware that distance does not erase, it only changes perspective. From the outside, the Berlin 1991 cold case appeared settled into its final shape, contextualized, archived, discussed in careful language that acknowledged failure without assigning blame. But cases do not end where institutions decide they should. They end, if they end at all, in the minds of those who carry them forward, in the quiet recalculations of people who lived nearby, worked adjacent, felt something shift without understanding why. Years passed. The city continued its work of reinvention, layering glass and steel over older foundations, rebranding neighborhoods that once felt provisional into destinations. The building where Anna died became unremarkable again, another address absorbed into normality. New residents moved in, unaware of the stairwell's history, of the mirror that once reflected a moment the city never fully understood. The absence of knowledge felt intentional, a collective agreement that some things were easier not to know. Occasionally, the case surfaced in academic discussions, in footnotes and panels about transitional justice, about how violence can hide inside periods of rapid change. Anna's name appeared alongside others, victims of neither war nor ordinary crime, but of systems stretched thin, priorities misaligned. She became representative, which was both honor and erasure, a way of remembering that blurred the specificity of her life. The detective followed these references from afar. He attended one lecture anonymously, sitting in the back row, listening as the speaker described structural opacity and distributed accountability. The language was accurate, precise, and utterly bloodless. It described conditions, not consequences. It did not capture the sound of footsteps in a stairwell, the hesitation before a call, the way a city can feel complicit without intending to be. After the lecture, a student asked whether unresolved cases ever truly mattered, whether the absence of closure diminished their relevance over time. The speaker answered with theory. The detective did not intervene. He knew the answer lived elsewhere, in places theory rarely visited. On anniversaries, Anna's parents lit a candle. They no longer spoke to the press. They had learned that repetition did not bring clarity, only exhaustion. Their grief had settled into something quieter, less sharp but no less present. When asked what they believed happened, they offered no speculation. Belief, they understood now, was a luxury they could not afford. Once, years later, Anna's mother returned to the building. She stood outside, looking up at windows that no longer meant anything to her, trying to reconcile the ordinariness of the place with the magnitude of what it held. She did not go inside. Some thresholds, once crossed, could not be crossed again. The detective received a letter around that time. It was handwritten, careful, brief. It thanked him for not letting the case disappear entirely. It did not ask for answers. It acknowledged the limits of what he could do. He read it once, then again, then placed it in a drawer he rarely opened. Time continued its work. Witnesses aged. Memories softened. Some of the names that had hovered at the edges of the investigation became obituaries, closing off paths that had never quite opened. The network the detective had traced dissolved further, its traces absorbed into legitimate structures or forgotten altogether. The system had moved on, as systems do, leaving behind only faint impressions. And yet, the cold case endured in subtler ways. In training rooms, instructors referenced it obliquely, a cautionary tale about assumptions, about how focusing too narrowly on individuals can obscure broader dynamics. In policy drafts, language appeared about verification, oversight, accountability during transitions. No one cited the case directly. It did not need to be named to be present. For the detective, the memory surfaced unexpectedly, triggered by unrelated scenes, a dimly lit stairwell in another city, a mirror catching the edge of a reflection, the sound of voices that stopped abruptly. Each time, he felt the same unresolved pull, the sense of standing just outside understanding, aware that something essential had happened beyond reach. He resisted the temptation to mythologize the case. There was no grand conspiracy waiting to be exposed, no final reveal withheld by fate. There was only convergence, timing, human behavior shaped by context. That truth was harder to accept than any villain narrative. It offered no catharsis, no moral clarity, only responsibility diffused across decisions too small to notice individually. In retirement, he sorted through old files, deciding what to keep. Many cases went into boxes marked for donation or disposal. The Berlin file he kept. Not out of obsession, but out of respect for its complexity. It reminded him why certainty should be treated with suspicion, why unanswered questions can be more instructive than answered ones. One evening, he opened the file again. The stairwell image was still there, the silhouette unchanged, resisting interpretation. The translated contract bore Anna's initials, still legible, still mundane. The municipal memo read as it always had, its warnings quietly prophetic. Together, they formed a constellation without a center, a story without a conclusion. He imagined a future researcher finding the file, reading it without the weight of lived proximity, seeing patterns he could not, or perhaps missing the emotional undercurrents entirely. He hoped, at least, that they would approach it with humility, aware that not all mysteries yield to persistence, that some remain because the world that produced them has already moved on. The city, too, carried the case forward in ways that could not be measured. In its caution. In its regulations. In its occasional pauses, moments when officials asked one more question than necessary, checked one more document than protocol required. These were small things, invisible to most, but they mattered. They were echoes of a lesson learned imperfectly, late, but not entirely lost. On the 30th anniversary of Anna's death, a brief article appeared in a local paper. It did not promise resolution. It did not speculate. It described the case as emblematic of a time when lines were blurred and oversight struggled to keep pace. It ended with a sentence about remembrance, about the importance of acknowledging lives interrupted without pretending that acknowledgement alone was justice. The detective read the article and felt a familiar mix of frustration and acceptance. He had wanted more, once. He had wanted a name, a moment when uncertainty collapsed into fact. Now, he understood that wanting did not make it so. The Berlin 1991 cold case remained what it had always been at its core, a story of a woman who should have been safe, a city in transition, and a convergence of circumstances that turned ordinary space into a site of irreversible loss. It was not solved in the way headlines promise. It was understood, partially, unevenly, with gaps that would likely never be filled. And yet, its persistence mattered. It mattered because it refused to be reduced to trivia or spectacle. It mattered because it forced those who encountered it to sit with discomfort, to accept that some truths are structural rather than personal, some responsibilities collective rather than individual. In the end, the case did not deliver justice. It delivered awareness. It did not name a killer. It named conditions. It did not close a wound. It marked it, ensuring it would not be mistaken for something else. Berlin continued to live with its ghosts, as it always had, not by exorcising them, but by acknowledging their presence, by letting them inform choices made in daylight. Anna Keller's death remained one of those ghosts, quiet, unresolved, but not forgotten, a reminder that even in times of renewal, shadows persist, and that understanding them is a task without an endpoint. The cold case stayed cold. Not because no one cared, but because some truths freeze where they fall, preserved not for resolution, but for memory.